They didn't wait for my permission. One moved behind me, his warm breath touching my shoulder as my robe shifted when his hand found my waist. The other stood directly in front, eyes meeting mine, silently challenging me to pull away or stay put. The washing room was barely lit by a single flickering light and the gentle hum of the dryer. I could smell fresh soap powder and his cologne. 4 hands met at my hips. I didn't push them away. I stayed silent. I let my back rest against the warm dryer. I let the tension grow between all 3 of us. I let them slowly take control, carefully, like they'd been thinking about this moment far longer than I had. And perhaps they really had. I convinced myself I'd forgotten what desire felt like. But honestly, I hadn't forgotten at all. I had buried it deep inside. I buried it every single time I folded his clothes. Every time we sat through another quiet dinner where nobody asked about my feelings. Every time I started another load of washing just to avoid that cold, empty bedroom upstairs. This wasn't something I planned. I never daydreamed about 2 pairs of hands moving like they'd been patiently waiting backstage for years. But when they both reached toward me, I didn't pull back. I opened that door wide and refused to shut it. It didn't feel like breaking any rules. It felt like remembering something I'd left for dead inside my heart. I'm 38 years old. I've been someone's wife for 12 long years. I'm the woman who never forgets special dates, who knows exactly how he takes his morning coffee, who collects his pressed shirts without being asked. But nobody has truly looked at me in such a long time, not in any real way. The first man, Caleb, happens to be my husband's cousin. A few years younger than me, divorced way too young, always treating me with that easy, almost invisible kindness. He's been visiting more often lately, helping fix things around our house, staying over when the weather gets bad. The second one, Jonah, is his closest friend from their college days. More rough around the edges, quieter than most, but with eyes that slice through any room like he's asking questions I'm too scared to answer. They both began showing up more frequently. At first, it seemed like pure chance, then it became routine, then it turned into something completely different. They never looked at me like I was slowly disappearing. That particular night, the storm knocked out all our electricity. My husband was away on another business trip that got delayed. I was folding clean towels beside the dryer when I heard knocking at the door, then more knocking. I wasn't expecting both of them together, but they arrived soaking wet, eyes tracing my robe like they'd never seen it before on my body. I can't recall who touched me first, only that I didn't stop either one of them. What would you do if the only people who made you feel alive were the ones you were never supposed to miss? The dryer stopped running. The room became silent except for my breathing and the soft sound of a zipper coming undone. I was shaking not from fear, but because I hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years, like I wasn't just a background piece in someone else's daily routine. This doesn't mean anything important. Not really. That's what I whispered to myself as Jonah pressed his lips against my neck and Caleb loosened the belt of my robe like it was some holy ritual. They weren't in any hurry. They didn't compete with each other. They simply understood. And I allowed them to continue. I wanted it desperately. I didn't even question why. The sound of our front door unlocking cut through everything like a knife. I froze completely. Jonah stepped back first. Caleb moved away like he hadn't just had his hand inside my robe. We said absolutely nothing. If you've ever craved something knowing it would destroy you but leaned in anyway, this story might hurt to hear. Please like and subscribe. We carry this pain together. The washing room light had flickered once before it died completely. I stood perfectly still in the darkness, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo down our hallway. My husband didn't come inside right away. I could hear his car door slam, then the beep of him locking it, then his footsteps slower than normal. By the time he turned that doorknob, I'd already fixed my robe and pressed my back against the washer, pretending to search for something in the laundry basket. Jonah had disappeared down the hallway. Caleb was pretending to check the electrical box, talking too loudly, as if noise could erase what had just happened between us. My husband stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain. He kissed my cheek gently and asked why the power was out. I nodded, smiled, and said I had no idea. And just like that, everything went back to normal, on the surface at least. The following morning felt exactly like every other. Scrambled eggs, buttered toast, a load of bed sheets tumbling in the dryer. My husband left early for work, and I was alone in the kitchen pouring coffee I didn't really want. But I could still feel the ghost of their fingers on my skin. Not in a romantic way, not even in a guilty way. It felt like I'd finally woken up, like I'd been drowning for years and suddenly remembered how to breathe again. I knew it was completely wrong, but I stayed in that feeling anyway. It didn't start with physical touches. It began quietly and slowly. Jonah would stop by after his work, bringing over things my husband had forgotten. A winter jacket, a set of house keys, a box of screws for repairs. He'd hand it to me, stay a moment too long, and then walk away. Caleb had his own pattern, fixing broken cabinet doors, trimming our hedges, always staying until the sun went down. I never invited them to stay longer, but I never told them to leave either. They filled the empty space my husband didn't seem to notice anymore. I don't say that with anger, just simple truth. There's a special kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. I had food on our table, a nice house, a man who came home every night. But nobody had asked how I was feeling in months. Nobody had kissed me without it, leading to the same old routine in years. The first real change came during a Wednesday grocery trip. Caleb offered to carry the heavy bags inside our house. Jonah followed along. I didn't ask either of them to come in, but they did anyway. I remember standing in our kitchen, the grocery bags still sitting on the counter, and Jonah staring out the window while Caleb leaned against our refrigerator like it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't talk much, but the silence felt thick, like something was pressing behind our ribcage. Jonah finally broke it. "You always do everything by yourself," he said, his voice low and concerned. I shrugged my shoulders. "Not always, but most days, yeah." He didn't respond to that. Neither did Caleb, but they didn't leave right away either. Over the next week, they kept showing up separately at first, then more often together. Always casual, always polite, always staying just a little too long. The strange part was it didn't feel threatening at all. It felt like being noticed, like I'd been invisible, and suddenly someone remembered I was still here. I didn't want to stop looking at them. I told myself it was nothing serious, just a little warmth during a cold stretch of my marriage. Just two men being kind to me. But I was watching them, too. Their broad shoulders, their comfortable silence, the way Jonah would watch me stir a pot like it meant something special. The way Caleb would lean a little closer every time he handed me a tool or passed behind me at the kitchen sink. There were moments when I swear the air around us got thicker, like a second too long in the small pantry. A brush of hands when passing the dinner plates. Once Jonah stood behind me while I reached for something on the top shelf. He didn't move away, didn't touch me, just stood there close enough that my breath caught and I had to leave the room immediately. They never made the first move, but neither did I, and somehow that made it so much worse. It was a Thursday night when things shifted again completely. My husband was out of town again on business. Caleb came over to help with a leaky kitchen pipe. Jonah tagged along without being invited. I made them both coffee. We all ended up in the garage sitting on overturned storage crates, the sound of rain on the roof like drum beats. Nobody said much until Jonah looked up and said, "Do you ever feel like no one sees you anymore?" I stared at him in shock. I didn't answer out loud, but I think he already knew. Caleb reached over and lightly touched my wrist. Just once, just a second too long. I didn't pull my hand away. That was the night I realized I wasn't the only one holding my breath around here. It wasn't worth the risk. I keep telling myself that. It's strange how quickly you start to notice the smallest things when you're starving for them. The way Jonah would clear his throat before speaking, like he was testing if it was safe to talk. The way Caleb lingered in the doorway after finishing a task, pretending to wait for thanks he didn't need. The way both of them stopped using words as often, replacing conversation with glances that stuck to my skin like honey. It became a clear pattern. My husband would leave for meetings, for late shifts, for whatever excuse he mumbled, and not long after, one or both of them would show up. Never announced, never questioned, like they knew when I needed the company more than I did myself. One afternoon, I opened the pantry door, and Jonah was there stocking the shelves from the grocery delivery I hadn't touched yet. He looked over his shoulder slowly, like he'd been waiting for me to find him there. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he said softly. He stepped aside but didn't leave the small space. I had to squeeze past him, and when I did, our shoulders touched. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. I stood in that narrow space, his breath close to the back of my neck, and reached for a can I didn't actually need. He didn't speak again, but his hand rested against the shelf beside mine. And for a moment, the world narrowed into that sliver of warmth between our arms. I left the pantry with my heart racing and a soup can I didn't want. This doesn't mean anything important. Not really. The tension wasn't loud or obvious. It was slow, like fog creeping in under the door. By the time you notice it, you're already breathing it into your lungs. I told myself it was completely harmless. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet. But I was changing quietly inside. I started brushing my hair a little more carefully in the mornings. I wore the softer robe instead of the old worn one. I waited by the window longer than necessary when I heard a car pull up outside. I stopped looking at my husband the same way. Or maybe I stopped looking at all. One night, Caleb stayed late after fixing the stair railing. My husband had called to say his flight was delayed again. I poured Caleb a drink, just one glass, just enough to relax. He sat on the living room floor, back against the couch. I stayed in the armchair across from him, legs folded, pretending to scroll through my phone. "You ever think," he said, eyes on the ceiling, "that you might have disappeared without anyone noticing?" I swallowed hard. "Sometimes," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Me too." Then complete silence. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than anything. The next day, Jonah showed up with groceries I hadn't asked for. He didn't ask permission to come in, just walked past me like he lived there. We put everything away without speaking. Our arms brushed twice. I didn't flinch away. I felt the warmth, sharp, invasive, almost cruel, and I wanted more of it. In the middle of putting away the milk, he looked directly at me and said, "You're allowed to want things for yourself." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Not all things," I replied. He didn't smile back. "No, but some things." I didn't answer, but I didn't stop him when he stepped closer to me. His hand didn't touch mine, not that time, but it hovered inches away from mine on the countertop. We stood there not moving as the refrigerator hummed behind us, and the groceries sat forgot on the kitchen floor. It was getting harder to breathe normally when they were near me. One of them always stood too close, the other always looked too long. And me, I always stayed just a little too still, like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't want to stop looking at them. Then came the storm warning on the local news. The weather station said it would hit by nightfall fast, hard, unpredictable. My husband texted me from the airport. His flight was grounded again. "Stay safe, I love you," he wrote. I stared at the screen too long before typing back. "You too." An hour later, both Jonah and Caleb were standing on my porch, soaking wet, carrying spare flashlights and a case of bottled water. Neither of them asked if they could stay the night. I stepped back and let them inside. And that was the beginning of the night I stopped pretending this wasn't happening. The power went out just after 9 o'clock. The wind had picked up dramatically, rattling our windows and making the trees outside creak like old bones. We lit a candle in the kitchen, then another in the hallway. Then we stopped lighting them all together. The house was still and dim. Every shadow felt like a held breath. I sat on the floor by the dryer, legs pulled in, robe cinched tight around my body. Caleb was across from me, arms on his knees, watching the flicker of the candle on top of the washer. Jonah leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular except me. No one spoke a single word. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged with electricity. A current too close to the surface. "I should check the electrical breaker again," I said just to say something. But I didn't move from my spot. Neither did they. Caleb reached for the candle and held it in his palm like he was grounding himself with the warmth. "Do you want us to leave?" he asked. It was quiet but heavy with meaning. I looked at him, then at Jonah, and said nothing at all. That was the exact moment it tipped over the edge. They didn't get up right away, didn't lunge forward or speak. Jonah moved first, just one step forward, then another. Caleb rose slowly from the floor, setting the candle down beside me, his fingers brushing mine as he did. That small contact broke something deep inside me. I stood up and they both closed the space between us. Not aggressively, not possessively, like they'd rehearsed this moment in their minds 1,000 different ways, but knew none of them would matter once it actually began. Jonah stood in front of me, Caleb behind. I could feel his chest at my back, steady and quiet. Jonah's hands came to rest gently at my hips, his thumbs just barely brushing the fabric. My robe wasn't fully closed. It didn't need to be. My breathing changed before I could stop it. I knew exactly what I was doing, but I let it happen anyway. No one spoke a word. Jonah's hands slid up slowly, not searching, not taking, just learning the shape of me. My shoulders dropped, tension unraveling in one long breath. I closed my eyes and gave in. Caleb's fingers met the knot at my waist. He paused for permission. I didn't stop him. They didn't rush through anything. Jonah leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine. Not a kiss, just presence, like he wanted me to feel him before anything else happened. Caleb's hand tugged the robe open carefully. The fabric parted like curtains. My skin met the cold air. I should have felt shame, but instead I felt seen. Jonah's lips brushed my collarbone, warm and deliberate. Caleb's hands curved along my waist, holding me like something fragile and chosen. They moved together, not in perfect sync, but in understanding. My back arched slightly against Caleb, my breath hitched in Jonah's hands. Their touches weren't demanding or rough. They were patient, almost reverent, like I was something sacred. I told myself I was just lonely and desperate, but it wasn't just that simple. The air smelled like drier sheets and skin, like something domestic turned wild and free. Jonah's fingers slipped under the edge of my robe, tracing slow lines that made me feel like I still had a body worth knowing and exploring. Caleb pressed a kiss to the base of my neck, gentle like an apology. My knees gave a little. They caught me without hesitation. I let them hold me up. We stayed like that, wrapped together, pressed close, unspoken promises hanging in the air, until it was undeniable, until my body answered before my mouth could. I turned slightly in Caleb's arms, reaching for Jonah, who kissed me like he'd been holding that breath since the first time he saw me. Caleb's hands didn't leave my waist. Jonah's mouth didn't leave mine. And when I finally exhaled fully and deeply, it felt like something broke loose in my ribs. This was always going to happen. I just kept lying to myself about when. It didn't last long, but it felt endless because it wasn't about lust or betrayal. It was about being chosen at the same time by two men who had quietly watched me fatting for years. And for once, I didn't have to reach for someone. They both reached for me. Afterward, we stayed there, tangled together, trembling, half-dressed in the dark laundry room while the storm raged outside our walls. No one spoke. Caleb rested his head against my shoulder. Jonah ran a finger along my wrist in slow, silent strokes. And for a moment, just a moment, I didn't feel guilty about anything. I just felt real and alive. I stopped being just a wife for one night and started being a woman again. By morning, the storm had passed completely. The sun filtered through the blinds like nothing had happened. Birds chirped outside. A car engine started down the street. The ordinary world had resumed, clean and unaware, but I wasn't the same. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing a mug I hadn't used, fingers scrubbing too hard against the ceramic, like I could erase what they had touched. The robe was gone, folded and hidden in the back of my dresser drawer. I'd showered twice, but their hands still felt like they lived on my skin. I wasn't supposed to feel that good. Not like that. Not with them both. I heard Jonah leave first, quiet as a whisper, a soft sound of the side door clicking shut. Caleb followed half an hour later. No words, just a soft nod when our eyes met in the hallway. Then I was completely alone. When my husband came home that evening, he brought sandwiches and a new flashlight. He kissed my cheek, told me he missed me, asked if everything was okay during the storm. I said, yes, of course. I smiled too big and bright. And then I went upstairs and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror until my face looked like a stranger's. I knew how to fake being okay. I'd been doing it for years and years. The silence between me and the men grew louder after that night. They didn't stop coming around, but they didn't linger either. Jonah would pass by and ask if I needed anything, never looking me directly in the eye. Caleb would text before he showed up now, even if it was just to drop off a tool for my husband. And I waited for something to crack and break, but it didn't. Not yet. 3 days later, I found one of their jackets in the laundry room, still damp from that night. I held it to my face, inhaling deeply before I realized what I was doing, and dropped it like it had burned me. I folded it anyway, set it by the door for pickup. The hardest part wasn't the memory of what happened. It was the return to the same old routine. Dinner, dishes, lights out at 10 o'clock sharp. My husband never noticed the way I flinched when he touched my back in bed. He never asked why I'd started sleeping with my body turned away from his. He didn't seem to feel the difference, but I did. Everything I'd numbed over the years had returned with a vengeance. I started to notice just how quiet our home had become, how every word was functional, how every glance was filtered through the lens of duty and obligation. And I started to wonder if this was what I was going to feel forever. It wasn't just desire I was feeling, it was grief, for the version of me I'd let die a long time ago. One night, I walked into the garage to look for something I don't even remember what it was. And Caleb was already there, fixing a loose hinge on the storage cabinet. He looked up, startled to see me. So was I. We didn't speak at first. He stood wiping his hands on a towel and opened his mouth like he wanted to say something.